and welcome to the lecture series on understanding Bertrand Russell's The Problems of Philosophy. In this lecture, I will discuss Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 of The Problems of Philosophy. Let us understand and explore one of the most fundamental questions in philosophy. Does the world exist independently of our perception? This question is the focus of Chapter 2 titled The Existence of Matter. Russell begins with a simple but profound example, a table in a room. He asks us to consider whether the table exists when no one is looking at it. So, Russell writes, "It is evident from what we have found that if there is a table at all, it must be independent of our perception." This remark sets the stage for the entire chapter. Russell wants us to see that what we immediately perceive, the color, shape, texture of the table, are not the table itself, but what he calls sense data. The question then becomes, is there something beyond sense data, something that exists even when no one perceives it? This chapter is deceptively simple. It begins with everyday experience, looking at a table, but quickly unfolds into one of the deepest philosophical problems, the relationship between appearance and reality. Russell's brilliance lies in his ability to take ordinary examples and show how they open onto profound metaphysical questions. In this lecture, we will carefully unpack Russell's argument, explore his use of examples, situate his thought in relation to earlier philosophers like Descartes and Berkeley, and reflect on the strengths and limitations of his position. Along the way, I will highlight key passages from the text to give you Russell's voice directly, so that we can appreciate both the clarity and the caution with which he approaches this problem. Russell begins by distinguishing between sense data and physical objects. Sense data are the immediate contents of our perception: colors, sounds, textures, shapes. Physical objects, by contrast, are the supposed external realities that cause these sense data. Russell says, what we directly see and feel is merely appearance, which depends upon us. What we call the real table is not immediately known to us at all, but must be an inference from what is immediately known. This distinction is crucial. When we look at the table, we see it as brown. But Russell points out that under different lighting, it may appear redder or darker. From one angle, it looks rectangular. From another, slightly trapezoidal. The smoothness we feel with our hand is not the same as the microscopic roughness that science tells us exists. So, the table as we perceive it is not fixed. What we have are shifting sense data. The physical object, which is the real table, is something we infer as the cause of these varying appearances. Russell emphasizes that this inference is not trivial. He says, the real table, if there is one, is not the same as what we immediately perceive. It is not the color, nor the shape, nor the hardness which we see and feel. The real table is something else, and we cannot be sure what it is. This passage underscores the epistemological gap between perception and reality. We cannot directly know the table itself. We only know its appearances. Yet, we continue to believe in the table's existence beyond our perception. Here, Russell is drawing on a long tradition in philosophy. John Locke distinguished between primary qualities like shape, motion, extension, and secondary qualities like color, taste, and sound, and he argued that the secondary qualities depend on the perceiver. Berkeley, by contrast, denied the existence of matter altogether, claiming that objects are nothing but collections of perceptions. Russell situates himself between these positions. He acknowledges that what we perceive are appearances, but insists that it is reasonable to believe in something beyond them. His skeptical attack runs like this: appearance is different from reality. We can only be certain of appearances. We are therefore uncertain about reality. We can reasonably doubt the reality of the external world. At this point, Russell, just like Descartes, acknowledges that perhaps there is no external world at all. Perhaps all that exists are our perceptions, or perhaps life itself is a dream. Russell says, it is not easy to see how we can know that there is a table at all. We are reduced to the position of Descartes, who could find no certainty except the certainty of his own existence and of his own thoughts. This is a striking admission. Russell concedes that absolute proof of the existence of matter is impossible. We cannot step outside our perceptions to verify whether there is a world beyond them. This echoes Descartes' method of doubt. Descartes famously concluded, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. For Descartes, the existence of the self was indubitable, but the existence of the external world required further argument. Russell, in this chapter, is grappling with the same problem. How can we move from the certainty of sense data to the uncertain existence of matter? The skeptical challenge is powerful because it undermines our everyday assumptions. If we cannot prove that the table exists beyond our perception, then perhaps the entire external world is a fiction. Russell does not dismiss this possibility lightly. Instead, he acknowledges its force, but then seeks to show why skepticism, though logically possible, is not practically compelling. Russell's defense of matter rests on two main points. First is intersubjective agreement, and second is consistency of sense data. Let us discuss the first, which is intersubjective agreement. We do notice different people reporting similar sense data of the same object. If one person sees a table, others do too. So, this shared experience suggests that there is something external causing these perceptions, and Russell illustrates this when he asks us to imagine him hosting a dinner party at his study. The famous table with which we have become so familiar is draped with a tablecloth and has been methodically arranged with all sorts of party food. Now imagine all his guests seated around the table, enjoying their own sensory experiences. And when Russell asks for the olives and one of the guests passes the requisite dish, it ceases to be an individual guest's sense data and becomes an object in the public sphere. Russell terms it as a public neutral object. Other people know what we are talking about, and this defense suggests the probability of objects transcending private experiences. Now let us discuss the second point, which is consistency of sense data. When we leave the room and return, the table appears again with similar properties. The appearances are not random, they follow patterns. And Russell says, the hypothesis that there is a real table corresponds better with our experience than the hypothesis that there is no table at all. This defense Russell actually illustrates with the cat example. He asks us to imagine a cat in his study. And as he is working, he looks up from time to time to see the cat asleep on a chair, rubbing herself against the table leg before slipping out of the room. Now, these three episodes are presented to the observer in the form of sense data. And when one asks the question, is there a cat in Russell's study to which the sense data correspond? Two alternatives are possible. The first supposes that Russell is subjected to disconnected experiences related to the cat while he is writing. The second supposes a correspondence between the sense data and the real cat that moves around in the study even while not being observed. The second alternative, according to Russell, although not proved, is simpler and more plausible. Therefore, Russell says, although we cannot prove the existence of matter, we have no reason to doubt it. The belief in matter is the simplest explanation of our sense data. This is a pragmatic justification. Russell does not claim certainty. Instead, he argues that belief in matter is the most reasonable hypothesis. It explains the regularity and predictability of our experiences better than skepticism does. We must acknowledge the modesty of Russell's claim. He does not say matter exists and we can prove it. He says matter probably exists because it is the best explanation of our perceptions. This prudent realism is characteristic of Russell's philosophy. He balances skepticism with common sense, acknowledging the limits of proof while affirming the rationality of everyday belief. So, in this chapter, Russell confronts the question of whether matter exists independently of our perception. He distinguishes between sense data and physical objects, acknowledges the skeptical challenge, and offers a pragmatic justification for belief in matter. His conclusion is modest but powerful when he says, although we cannot prove the existence of matter, we have no reason to doubt it. This prudent, careful kind of realism sets the stage for the rest of the book. It reminds us that philosophy often begins with doubt but does not end there. Instead, it seeks the most reasonable path forward, balancing skepticism with the demands of everyday life. Up till now, we have understood how Russell begins with the distinction between appearance and reality in chapter 1, and how in chapter 2 he asks whether matter exists at all. Now, in chapter 3, the title of which is The Nature of Matter, Russell takes us one step further. He asks, if matter does exist, what is it really like? Now, this is not a trivial question. It forces us to confront the gap between what we perceive, like the colors, sounds, textures, and what science tells us matter is: particles, waves, motions. Russell's brilliance lies in showing us how this gap opens up profound philosophical problems. He begins by reminding us of the conclusion reached earlier when he says, we have found reason to believe that there is a real table which persists independently of our perception of it. But then he immediately presses the next question. We must now consider what is the nature of the real table. What is the nature of matter? You must notice that Russell's method is to move step by step. He doesn't rush to conclusions. First, he asks whether matter exists. Now, he asks what it is. He turns to science for an answer. And science describes matter in terms very different from our everyday experience. Light, which we see as brightness and color, is described by science as a wave motion. Heat, which we feel as warmth, is described as the motion of molecules. Sound, which we hear as tones, is described as vibrations in the air. So, Russell says, science, in seeking to tell us the nature of matter, reduces it to motions of particles or of waves. This is striking. Science strips away the vivid qualities of experience and replaces them with abstract mathematical descriptions, which is why Russell emphasizes the gap between what we perceive and what science describes. And he says, the real table, if there is one, is not the same as what we immediately perceive by sight or touch or hearing. The real table is, according to science, a vast collection of particles in motion. So, the brownness of the table, the smoothness we feel, the hardness we knock against, none of these are part of the scientific description of matter. They are appearances, not reality. And this raises a problem. If science tells us matter is just particles and motions, then what happens to the qualities we actually experience? So, Russell now introduces us to a distinction that goes back to philosophers like Locke and Descartes. It is the distinction between primary qualities and secondary qualities. Primary qualities are the ones that belong to the object itself. For example, shape, size, motion, number. Secondary qualities are the ones that exist only in the mind of the perceiver. For example, color, sound, taste, smell. Russell explains that the distinction between primary and secondary qualities is that the former are thought to be part of the real table, while the latter are thought to be merely the result of the relation between the table and ourselves. So, the table really has a certain shape and size, but it does not really have color or taste. Those are effects produced in our minds. Russell, however, does not accept this distinction uncritically. He wonders, why should we think shape and motion are more real than color and sound? So he says, it is not easy to see why we should regard shape as more real than color. Both are known to us only through sense data, and both vary according to our point of view. We all must think about it. The shape of the table changes depending on where we stand. It looks rectangular from one angle, trapezoidal from another. Just as color varies with light, shape varies with perspective. So why privilege one over the other? Russell's point is that the distinction between primary and secondary qualities is not as firm as philosophers and scientists often assume. He emphasizes that matter is not directly perceived. What we perceive are sense data. Matter is something we infer as the cause of sense data. In Russell's words, what we call matter is merely a convenient hypothesis, a way of accounting for the fact that we have certain sense data. Now, this is crucial. It means that matter, as science describes it, is not something we ever encounter directly. It is a theoretical construct, an explanatory device. So, he considers alternative philosophical views about the nature of matter. One is idealism of Berkeley, who claims that matter does not exist independently of perception. What exists are ideas and minds. And his argument is to be perceived. For him, the table is not a collection of particles but simply the idea of a table in God's mind. The second alternative philosophical view is of Leibniz. Leibniz claims that matter is not extended substance but a community of souls or simple substances. For him, reality was made up of spiritual entities, not physical particles. And of course, the third is the scientific view, according to which matter is electrical charges, fields, or energy. Even in Russell's time, science was moving away from the solid particles to more abstract notions. Russell presents these views to show that there is no single settled answer to the question of what matter really is. So Russell does not give a definitive answer. Instead, he emphasizes the tentative and hypothetical nature of our knowledge of matter. He says, our knowledge of matter is not direct, but inferential. We cannot say with certainty what matter is, but only that it must be something which causes data. This is a modest, cautious position. Russell is skeptical of dogmatic claims, whether from science or philosophy. He wants us to see that the nature of matter is a problem, not a settled fact. You can see that this chapter has deep implications for epistemology. It shows that our knowledge of the external world is indirect. It shows that science gives us abstract models, not the reality we perceive. It shows that philosophy must remain critical and questioning, not simply accept scientific or common sense accounts. Finally, Russell concludes by saying that the problem of the nature of matter is one which philosophy cannot solve once and for all. It is a problem that remains open, inviting further inquiry. In conclusion, we can say that philosophy begins when the obvious becomes problematic. The table in front of you is not just a table, it is a gateway to the deepest questions about reality. With this, I will end the lecture. Thank you. Thank you so much.